your life is as happy as it is virtuous. Now, what is virtue? I believe virtue is doing what you know you should do. And I believe all of us know what it is that we should do. And I believe the still small voice, our conscience, is the thing that batters us, berates us to do this. And our life is as happy as it is in accordance with listening to that voice. If you do the opposite of what this still small voice tells you to do, of what your conscience tells you to do, then you are as wretched as you could be. And if you do exactly what it tells you to do, always, you're as happy as you can be. And I believe this is virtue. And this is what Seneca says in his essay on the happy life. Now, I've read this essay. It's in Hardships and Happiness, this book right here. And I've read it probably 5 times. And I read it for the 6th time the other day. And this time I read it, and I think with all works of that nature, each time you read it, you take something different from it because of, the quote, there's a quote, no man steps in the same river twice, for the river is not the same, nor is the man. And, with essays, they are the same, they don't change, but you always come into the essay a different person, different experiences, different moments in your life, a different moment in your life that is, you are now, you have different lenses on that you are now seeing this essay through. And I believe when I first started reading the Stoics and embarking on the journey of wisdom, I dogmatically followed the idea that virtue was enough, that the happy life is the life consistent in virtue, and virtue is enough in and of itself. And I dogmatically followed that because many greats proclaimed this wisdom. But only through, you know, veering off the path have I noticed and have I come to a true realization and understanding that the happy life truly is the virtuous life. And I've done a lot of thinking about what virtue is because, there's the definition of virtue, which is like high moral standards, but then there's the question of what is high moral standards, and that's pretty subjective. And all the ancients have different definitions for it. Socrates would say that virtue is knowledge because Socrates was under the impression that you could no one willingly does wrong. No one is willingly deprived of the truth. So he believed if someone does wrong, they are just lacking knowledge. So virtue is consistent with knowledge because if you just had enough knowledge, you would always act virtuously. Aristotle says that it's the mean between excess and absence. Courage. There's recklessness, and then there's cowardice, rashness, and cowardice, and then in the middle is courage, and that's the mean. You don't want to be reckless, and you don't want to be a coward, and then finding the mean of those two vices, that is virtue, and that's what Aristotle would say. And many others have their own, many of the great philosophers have their own opinion of what virtue is and how it is obtained. And I believe it's listening to the still small voice. I think doing what you know to be right, because I think to a certain degree virtue is subjective. I think, well, let me correct that statement. I think virtue is objective, but I don't know if it's possible for us to ever come to an understanding of what that objectiveness is. So, in our limited human understanding of things, of universal things, virtue is subjective. And I think the closest we can get is doing what we know to be right deep down inside of us. And I believe everybody has the capacity to tune into that voice, to tune into that thing that tells them what is right and what is wrong. And I believe in each and every one of us that thing's divine. I would that is what I would call God. In the Bible, in Elijah, in the Old Testament, it talks about it says, God is not in the wind, God was not in the fire, God was not in anything but the still small voice. God was in the still small voice. And that is, to me, to my understanding, the consciousness. And if that is God, then it's virtuous. If God is benevolent, and all we can do is listen to it, or all we should do is listen to it. And I believe that is now my definition of virtue. And if we always listen to that voice, if we always do what we believe deep down inside of us to be right, I really don't see how we could be unhappy. I don't see how we could be wretched. I don't see how we could regret anything, because we are only doing what we believe is best. We're only doing that which we think we must do. And for those reasons, I do not see how that anything but the happy life could come out of that. Care not for the opinions of others, and only for your conscience, only for the state of your well-being in terms of your conscience. And you don't want to do things for the sake of the opinions of the crowd when you have a divine conscience in you that is telling you the right path to follow. You want to listen to that thing. That is virtue. That is the only way to be happy. That is the only way to be fulfilled, to be satisfied, to not regret life. And I think the example I gave in the beginning is worth mentioning again, that I think it's clear to see that if we did exactly the opposite of what that voice tells us to do, we would be, in relation to that, furthest away from the happy life. So does it not make sense that if we do everything that that voice tells us to do, then we are closest to the happy life? We are as close as we can be to the fulfilled, satisfied, peaceful, tranquil, eudaimonium, the happy life. And I think it's clear that that is it. Because even when you mess up, even if the voice is ever wrong, then you know you did what you thought best, and that's all you can do. It's truly all you can do. And I think depression, sadness, all these things arise from not listening to that voice. All these things. There's the person who gets diagnosed with cancer, and then they quit their job because they've always wanted to, and they start pursuing a dream. They start doing something that deep down inside of them they've always felt like they should be doing. They've always wanted to do. They've always wanted to try. And then, they go into remission. That's I don't want to say classic example, but it's definitely happened before. And what could that be other than the soul healing the body? Because the soul made the body sick, because you were living so out of whack with what your destiny, well, with what you were meant to do. Your soul got very sick, and in turn made your body sick. And it took that realization, it took that material, fleshly concern to heal your soul. Don't let it get to that point. Just do as the still small voice commands. Trust it, and understand that that is where virtue is. Virtue is doing what you know to be right. What you know to be right. The rest does not matter.